Worthless. The word hung in the air of our living room like poison gas, seeping into every corner of the modernist space I'd carefully designed. I kept my expression neutral as David continued his tirade, his manicured hands gesturing wildly, sending ripples through the expensive scotch in his tumbler. Scotch I'd bought him for our anniversary. 10 years of marriage. And what do you contribute, Eliza? You flit from hobby to hobby. Interior design 1 month, photography the next. You couldn't even finish your MBA. He loosened his Hermes tie, the one I'd given him last Christmas. Meanwhile, I'm building something. Making partner at 38 doesn't happen by accident. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I remained silent, a skill I'd perfected over the years. David mistook my silence for weakness, for acquiescence. He never understood it was calculation. Look at this place, he continued, sweeping his arm to encompass our penthouse apartment overlooking the Chicago skyline. Everything here, everything, is because of me. My work, my connections, my talent. The irony almost made me smile. David had no idea who actually owned the building we lived in, or that his firm's most prestigious client had been secured through a quiet dinner I'd arranged with an old college friend. He didn't know that the investment portfolio he bragged about at dinner parties was performing exceptionally well because of adjustments I made while he slept off his frequent hangovers. Maybe Audrey's right, David murmured, more to himself than to me. Maybe it's time to stop pretending. Audrey Winters, his 28-year-old associate. I'd known about the affair for 6 months, 17 days, and approximately 4 hours. Not that I would tell him that. Pretending what, David? I kept my voice soft, curious rather than confrontational. That this marriage isn't a mistake. He drained his glass, refusing to meet my eyes. You need me, Eliza. Let's be honest. You'd be nothing without me. But I don't need dead weight anymore. Not when I'm this close to making senior partner. Absorbed the blow without flinching. From anyone else, those words might have wounded me. From David, they were merely the final confirmation I needed. I'd been collecting evidence for months, building a case file that would have impressed the FBI. Financial records, text messages, emails, hotel receipts. A comprehensive documentation of David's indiscretions, both personal and professional. I see, I said simply. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's it? I see? David's handsome face contorted with frustration. At 42, he still possessed the chiseled features and thick dark hair that had caught my attention at that charity gala 12 years ago. Before I knew the monster beneath the polished exterior. This is exactly what I'm talking about. No fight, no passion, just nothing. I crossed the living room to the bar cart and poured myself a small measure of bourbon. What would you like me to say, David? I don't know. Something. Anything other than sitting there like some decoration. He ran his hands through his hair, disheveling the perfect coif he spent 20 minutes on each morning. Audrey's alive. She's ambitious. She challenges me. Does she know about the Kellerman account? I asked mildly, taking a small sip of my drink. David froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. What about it? Just curious if you've told her how you really secured it. I kept my tone conversational, as though discussing the weather rather than the fraudulent documentation I'd discovered hidden in his home office safe. A safe whose combination he thought I didn't know. I don't know what you're talking about, he replied stiffly, but a slight tremor in his hand betrayed him. And even if I did, it's none of your concern. You've never understood the complexities of corporate law. I smiled then, the small, enigmatic smile that always unnerved him. Perhaps you're right. David stared at me for a long moment, suspicious, but ultimately dismissive. People like David always underestimate people like me. It's their fatal flaw. "I'm staying at the Peninsula tonight," he finally announced, setting down his empty glass with unnecessary force. "I need space to think, space to be with Audrey in the luxury suite they frequented, charged to his corporate card under the guise of client meetings. Suite 1217, always the same room." "Take all the time you need," I replied. After he left, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, watching the Chicago lights glitter against the darkness of Lake Michigan. For most of our marriage, I'd played a role, the supportive, decorative wife who didn't challenge, his fragile ego. I'd stayed quiet when he belittled my intelligence at dinner parties, when he made condescending comments about my little projects to his colleagues, when he interrupted me during conversations to explain concepts I understood far better than he did. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text. "It's time." The response came immediately. "Ready when you are." I moved to my home office, a small room David rarely entered because it held no interest for him. Behind a false panel in the bookshelf was a state-of-the-art laptop that contained the other half of my life, the half David knew nothing about. Elizabeth Chen was the name on my birth certificate, but the business world knew me as E.C. Winters, the reclusive founder and CEO of Winterfall Capital, one of the most successful private equity firms in the Midwest. Through layers of shell companies and carefully constructed legal entities, I controlled assets worth billions, including the building we lived in and, as of 3 months ago, a controlling interest in Drake & Associates, the law firm where David had spent 15 years climbing the ladder. My father had built a small but successful import business that was systematically dismantled by predatory investors when I was 19. He died of a heart attack 1 week after losing everything. I'd made a promise at his funeral that I would never be powerless again, never watch someone I loved destroyed by people who viewed money as a game and lives as collateral damage. I'd met David during my first year building Winterfall. Back then, I was still figuring out how to navigate the male-dominated world of finance, still learning the painful lesson that a young woman would never be taken seriously unless she hid behind masculine pseudonyms and mysterious corporate structures. David had seemed different, supportive, encouraging. I'd believed in our partnership enough to reveal my ambitions, my dreams. "That's cute," he'd said, patting my hand. "But leave the serious business to me, sweetheart. That's why you're getting an MBA, right? To help me manage my practice someday." Instead of arguing, I simply changed strategies. I compartmentalized my life, wife by day, financial mastermind by night. While David networked at legal conferences, I built an empire in the shadows, using the knowledge I gained from his loose lips and careless document handling to make strategic investments and acquisitions. I powered up the laptop and logged into my secure server. The comprehensive file on David appeared, along with a separate folder labeled Drake & Associates Restructuring. I opened a video chat window, and 3 faces appeared on the screen: my executive team, the only people who knew the full extent of both my personal and professional lives. "Good evening, gentlemen," I greeted them. "We're moving forward. Timeline Alpha." Marcus Chen, my cousin and Winterfall's COO, nodded briskly. Unlike me, he'd kept our family name, protected by male privilege and a Harvard MBA. "All pieces are in position. The board is prepared for tomorrow's announcement." "The legal team has reviewed everything," added Richard Park, our chief legal counsel. "The documentation is ironclad. Once we trigger this, there's no going back." The third face belonged to James Winters, no relation to my business pseudonym, a coincidence I'd found amusingly convenient. My CFO and the man who'd helped me build Winterfall from scratch when no one else would take me seriously. "The financial restructuring is ready," James confirmed. "We can begin transferring control at your word." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about revenge against a cheating husband. It was about correcting a fundamental injustice. Drake and Associates had systematically discriminated against female attorneys for years, creating a toxic culture that valued billable hours over human dignity. The evidence I'd gathered went far beyond David's affair with Audrey. It documented a pattern of harassment, discrimination, and occasional financial impropriety that started at the top and filtered down. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., we take control, I decided. Make sure all electronic access is transferred precisely as we discussed. I don't want a single document deleted or a single email erased. After signing off, I spent the next several hours reviewing every detail of our plan. By 3 a.m., satisfied that nothing had been overlooked, I finally went to bed. For the first time in years, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, unburdened by the weight of my double life. Morning arrived with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony. I woke at 6 a.m., earlier than usual, and dressed with special care, an Armani suit in charcoal gray, subtle but exquisite diamond earrings, my grandmother's jade pendant hidden beneath my silk blouse. Armor for the battle ahead. David hadn't come home, as expected. A quick check of his credit card activity showed a room service breakfast for two at the Peninsula. I smiled as I sipped my coffee, imagining his shock when he finally arrived at the office. At precisely 8:30 a.m., my phone rang. Marcus, right on schedule. The board meeting is about to begin, he informed me. Hernandez tried to reschedule, but we explained that the major shareholder wasn't available later. Stanley Hernandez, managing partner at Drake and Associates and David's mentor, a man who'd once told a female associate that maternity leave was an unfortunate business necessity that put women at a disadvantage in the partnership track. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I replied, gathering my portfolio and car keys. C. Drive to Drake and Associates took 15 minutes in Chicago's morning traffic. I parked in the executive garage beneath the gleaming glass tower, a space my name badge surprisingly granted me access to. The security guard nodded respectfully, clearly informed of my expected arrival. Good morning, Ms. Chen. The board is waiting in the main conference room on 42. I smiled, feeling the first flutter of anticipation. Thank you. The elevator ride was smooth and swift. As the doors opened onto the executive floor, I was met by Marcus, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that emphasized his athletic build. Everything's in place, he murmured as we walked toward the conference room. They've been informed that Winterfall Capital has acquired controlling interest, but they don't know about you yet. And David? Just arrived downstairs. Security has been instructed to let him proceed normally. We've estimated approximately 7 minutes until he reaches this floor. Perfect timing. I paused outside the frosted glass doors of the conference room, catching a glimpse of the silhouettes inside. 10 men and 2 women, the entire executive board of Drake and Associates. I could feel their tension from here, the nervous energy of powerful people suddenly confronted with an unexpected change in the established order. Ready? Marcus asked. I nodded, straightening my shoulders. Absolutely. He opened the door, and all conversation inside ceased immediately. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, expressions ranging from confusion to suspicion to outright hostility. Stanley Hernandez sat at the head of the table, his silver hair and patrician features arranged in a careful mask of corporate civility. Mr. Chen? Hernandez acknowledged Marcus with a crisp nod. We were just discussing the unusual nature of this morning's meeting. His gaze shifted to me, dismissive and questioning. I don't believe we've been introduced to your associate. Marcus smiled thinly. This isn't my associate, Mr. Hernandez. This is Elizabeth Chen, founder and CEO of Winterfall Capital, your new majority shareholder. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft click of my heels against the polished floor as I moved to the table. I didn't sit down. Not yet. Good morning, I greeted them, my voice calm and measured. I understand this comes as a surprise to many of you. Rest assured, this transition has been carefully planned to minimize disruption to your clients and operations. Hernandez recovered first, his practiced smile not quite reaching his eyes. Ms. Chen, with all due respect, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Drake & Associates is a privately held partnership. We don't have shareholders in the traditional sense. I placed my portfolio on the table and removed a slim document, sliding it across to him. 3 months ago, your firm restructured its corporate governance to secure additional capital for expansion into the Asian market. That restructuring included the creation of a special class of equity shares, which Winterfall Capital has systematically acquired through various channels. His face paled as he quickly scanned the document. This is impossible. These transactions would have required board approval. They did receive board approval, I replied smoothly, though perhaps not with full understanding of the consequences. Page 12, paragraph 4 might refresh your memory. As Hernandez flipped frantically through the document, the elevator chime sounded faintly in the hallway. Right on schedule. In simple terms, I continued, addressing the increasingly agitated board members, Winterfall Capital now controls 63% of Drake & Associates voting equity. Effective immediately, we will be implementing significant operational changes, beginning with management restructuring. The conference room door burst open, and David appeared, his face flushed and his tie askew. He froze when he saw me, confusion giving way to shock. Eliza? What are you doing here? His gaze darted between me and Hernandez. Stanley? What's going on? Before Hernandez could respond, I turned to face my husband fully. Hello, David. I was just explaining to the board that Drake & Associates is now under new management. David's expression would have been comical under different circumstances, the slow-motion collapse of arrogance into comprehension, then disbelief. What are you talking about? He demanded. You can't just walk in here and, actually, I can. I interrupted calmly. As the representative of the majority shareholder, I have not only the right, but the responsibility to ensure this firm is being properly managed. I finally took a seat at the table, not at the foot where visitors usually sat, but directly opposite Hernandez. Marcus discreetly placed a sleek laptop in front of me and opened it to reveal a presentation titled, Drake & Associates, Restructuring for the Future. Please, David, take a seat. I gestured to an empty chair. This concerns you too. He remained, standing, his handsome face contorted with confusion. I don't understand. How could you possibly? Perhaps I haven't properly introduced myself, I said, allowing a small smile. To the world of finance, I'm known as E.C. Winters, founder and CEO of Winterfall Capital. To you, I'm just Eliza, the worthless wife who couldn't finish her MBA. The blood drained from David's face as the implications of my words sank in. Around the table, board members exchanged alarmed glances. E.C. Winters was a name they all knew, the reclusive financial genius who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire seemingly overnight, whose investment strategies were legendary in certain circles. That's impossible, David whispered. You couldn't be worthless, I finished for him. Perhaps not quite as worthless as you thought. Hernandez cleared his throat, visibly struggling to regain control of the situation. Ms. Chen, or Ms. Winters if you prefer, regardless of your financial stake, Drake & Associates operates according to specific partnership agreements and governance protocols. You can't simply walk in and declare yourself in charge. I nodded, appreciating his attempt to rally. You're absolutely right, Mr. Hernandez. That's why I've spent the past several months documenting extensive violations of those very protocols. I tapped a key on the laptop, and the presentation advanced to a slide titled Governance Violations and Ethical Breaches. Section 1, Discriminatory Hiring and Promotion Practices. My team has identified a consistent pattern of qualified female associates being passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified male counterparts. Another keystroke. Another slide. Section 2, Hostile Work Environment. We have collected sworn statements from 27 current and former employees detailing specific instances of harassment, intimidation, and retribution. With each new slide, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. David remained frozen. Near the doorway, his eyes fixed on me with growing horror. Section 3. Financial Impropriety. This is particularly concerning, as it involves several major clients, including the Kellerman account. David flinched visibly at the mention of Kellerman, and Hernandez's carefully composed expression finally cracked. "These are serious allegations," he managed, his voice tight. "But allegations require proof, and even then, there are established procedures for addressing such concerns." "I agree completely," I replied, closing the laptop. "That's why copies of our complete findings with supporting documentation have already been provided to the Illinois Attorney Disciplinary Commission, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. I believe they'll establish the appropriate procedures from here." The ensuing silence was profound, broken only by David's ragged breathing. "You can't do this," he finally said, his voice barely above, a whisper. "Everything I've worked for is still here." I finished for him. "Drake and Associates will continue to operate, David. It will simply operate differently, more ethically, more inclusively, and with proper oversight." I stood, smoothing my suit jacket. "Now, I suggest we take a brief recess. When we reconvene, in 30 minutes, we'll discuss the specific changes to leadership and operational protocols that will be implemented immediately." As board members filed out in stunned silence, I remained at the table, arranging my notes with deliberate precision. David lingered after everyone else had gone, his expensive suit suddenly seeming to hang on him like an ill-fitting costume. "Why?" he asked simply, all pretense stripped away. I looked up at him, this man I had once loved, now reduced to the true dimensions of his character. "Because you called me worthless, David, and I decided to show you exactly how much I'm worth." He sank into a chair, his arrogance deflating with each passing second. "What happens now?" "Now?" I gathered my portfolio and stood. "Now I go meet with the restructuring team to finalize the new organizational chart. I believe your friend Audrey Winters is due for a promotion. She's quite talented, from what I've seen in her file, though perhaps not in the ways you've appreciated." "You knew about Audrey?" His voice cracked slightly. "I know everything, David. That's what made me so valuable, and you so very, very replaceable." As I walked toward the door, he called after me, desperation edging his voice. "And us? What about our marriage?" I paused, turning back with a small, sad smile. "I'll have the divorce papers delivered to your office this afternoon. Don't worry about moving your things out of the penthouse. I've arranged for a service to pack and deliver them to the peninsula. Suite 1217, I believe. You seem to like it there." The shock on his face confirmed what I already knew. That he'd never truly seen me, never bothered to look beyond the careful facade I'd constructed. It was his loss, and now his downfall. In the hallway, Marcus was waiting with Richard and James, my executive team ready to implement the next phase of our plan. "The HR team is standing by," Marcus informed me. "We've identified key positions for immediate review and replacement." I nodded, feeling remarkably light. "Let's proceed, and make sure Ms. Winters, Audrey Winters, is scheduled for an interview at 2 o'clock. I'd like to personally assess her potential in a non-compromised environment." As we walked toward the temporary office they'd prepared for me, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflective glass of a conference room, straight-backed, clear-eyed, unmistakably in command. For years, I'd hidden in the shadows, building my empire in secret while enduring David's casual cruelty and dismissal. No more shadows. No more pretending to be less than I was. No more silently absorbing the word worthless from a man who couldn't recognize true value if it was labeled and cataloged in front of him. Are you ready for the department heads meeting? Richard asked as we approached the executive suite that would now serve as my command center for the restructuring. I smiled, feeling the weight of the jade pendant against my skin. My grandmother's. Reminder that true strength often lies in patient endurance until the perfect moment to strike. More than ready, I replied. It's time they learned what worthless really looks like. The temporary office they'd prepared overlooked the Chicago River, the spring sunlight glinting off the water in sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere inside the building. On the desk was a detailed organizational chart of Drake & Associates, with certain names highlighted in red, starting with Stanley Hernandez and including David's entire circle of sycophants and enablers. The first wave of terminations has been prepared, James informed me, placing a stack of personnel files next to the chart. Legal has reviewed everything to ensure compliance with employment regulations and partnership agreements. I scanned the files quickly, noting the careful documentation of performance issues, ethical violations, and cultural toxicity. Have security standing by? I want this handled professionally, but decisively. Of course, Marcus agreed. We've also prepared announcements for clients to reassure them about continuity of representation during the transition. A soft knock at the door interrupted us. It was Lisa Joe, a senior associate I'd identified from personnel records as someone repeatedly passed over for partnership despite outstanding performance metrics. Ms. Chen, the department heads are assembled in Conference Room B. Thank you, Lisa, I replied warmly. And please call me Elizabeth. Her surprise at being addressed as a peer rather than a subordinate was evident, but she quickly recovered. Yes, Elizabeth. They're quite anxious. As they should be, I murmured, gathering my materials. Change is always uncomfortable, especially for those who've benefited from the status quo. The conference room fell silent as I entered, 6 department heads watching me with varying degrees of apprehension and hostility. I recognized most from David's work functions, men who'd spoken over me at dinner parties, who'd made condescending remarks about my little hobbies, who'd exchanged knowing glances when David dismissed my opinions. Good morning, I began, taking my place at the head of the table. I understand there's considerable confusion about what's happening today. Let me be clear. Drake & Associates is now under the majority control of Winterfall Capital. The firm will continue to operate, but with significant changes to leadership, culture, and operational priorities. Morris Davies, head of corporate litigation and David's favorite drinking buddy, leaned forward with a forced smile. Ms. Chen, while we respect your investment, you must understand that a law firm isn't like other businesses. Our clients rely on stability and continuity. Any disruption could be catastrophic. I agree completely, Mr. Davies, I replied pleasantly. That's why we've already communicated with your top 20 clients to assure them that their matters are being handled with appropriate attention. Interestingly, 17 of them expressed relief at the prospect of more diverse leadership. His smile faltered. You contacted our clients? Without authorization? As majority shareholder, I am the authorization, Mr. Davies. But more importantly, as someone committed to ethical business practices, I felt obligated to address certain inconsistencies in client billing that our review uncovered. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I opened a folder and slid a document across to Davies. Your department in particular showed some creative approaches to hourly billing. 300 billable hours in January for the Westland case? That's impressive, considering court records show it settled on January 12th. Davies paled visibly. There must be some mistake. There were many mistakes, I agreed. And they will all be rectified. Now, let's discuss the new departmental structure. Effective immediately, all department heads will report to an executive committee consisting of myself, Marcus Chen, Richard Park, and James Winters. I distributed revised organizational charts showing the dramatic reshuffling of power. Several names were conspicuously absent, including Davies' own. Where's my position? He demanded, voice rising. This is outrageous. I've been with this firm for 20 years. Your services are no longer required, Mr. Davies, I informed him calmly. Security is waiting to escort you to clean out your office. Your clients will be redistributed among associates who haven't been manipulating their billable hours. As Davies sputtered in indignation, I continued through the list, methodically informing each toxic leader of their termination. By the time I finished, only 2 of the original 6 department heads remained, both looking shell-shocked, but considerably less arrogant than when the meeting began. Ms. Chen, ventured Janet Maxwell, head of intellectual property, and one of the survivors. May I ask what qualities you're looking for in the new leadership team? I smiled, genuinely appreciating her directness. Competence, integrity, collaborative spirit, and a demonstrated commitment to developing talent regardless of gender, race, or background. The legal industry has operated on an outdated model for too long. Drake & Associates has an opportunity to become a leader in changing that paradigm. After the meeting concluded and security began the process of escorting terminated executives from the building, I took a moment alone in the conference room, watching the drama unfold through the glass walls. David was standing by the elevators, his face ashen as he observed his colleagues being escorted out, cardboard boxes in hand. Our eyes met through the glass. In his, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear, certainly, but also a dawning recognition. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing me, truly seeing me, not as an accessory or a convenience, but as a force to be reckoned with. I held his gaze steadily until he looked away first, shoulders slumping in defeat as he turned toward his office, an office he would be vacating within the hour. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Audrey Winters has arrived for her 2 p.m. interview. Conference Room C. I took a deep breath, centering myself for this next critical encounter. Audrey wasn't just David's mistress. She was also a talented attorney who had been manipulated and used within a corrupt system. My research suggested she had potential that had been deliberately channeled into inappropriate relationships rather than professional advancement. Conference Room C was smaller, more intimate than the executive spaces. Audrey sat alone at the table, elegant in a navy suit that couldn't quite disguise her nervousness. She stood when I entered, her confident smile faltering slightly as she recognized me from David's company functions. Mrs. Morrison, she began, confusion evident in her tone. I don't understand. I was told I had an interview with E.C. Winters. You do, I replied calmly, extending my hand. Elizabeth Chen Winters. Please, sit down. She sank back into her chair, her perfectly composed facade cracking to reveal genuine shock. You're E.C. Winters? But you're David's wife. Yes, though not for much longer. I took a seat across from her, placing her personnel file on the table between us. That's not why we're here, Ms. Winters. We're here to discuss your professional future. Her pale complexion flushed deep red. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything about your relationship with David. That's between you and him. I opened her file, turning to her case record. I'd rather discuss the Harbinson brief you wrote last year. It was quite impressive. Innovative approach, solid research. Yet somehow David's name appeared as primary counsel while yours was buried in the footnotes. Surprise flickered across her face. How did you know that? I make it my business to know things, Ms. Winters. Just as I know that you've been passed over for lead counsel positions 3 times despite your superior performance metrics. Just as I know that your salary is 23% lower than male associates with comparable experience. Audrey's expression shifted from embarrassment to something harder, more focused. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity, I clarified. Drake & Associates is undergoing significant restructuring. We're creating a new position, Director of Associate Development, responsible for mentoring junior attorneys and ensuring equitable distribution of career-advancing opportunities. I slid a job description across the table. The salary figure at the bottom was nearly double her current compensation. "Why me?" she asked warily. "Especially given circumstances." "Because your work speaks for itself, Ms. Winters. Because you've navigated a deeply flawed system as best you could with the tools available to you. And because I believe in second chances, for institutions and for individuals." I stood, smoothing my skirt. "Take 24 hours to consider the offer. The position reports directly to me, so you should be certain you can work comfortably in that arrangement." As I reached the door, she called after me. "Did you know about David and me?" I paused, turning back. Yes, I knew everything. The question is, "Did you know about me?" She shook her head slowly. "He said you were uninvolved, uninterested in his work, that you were content to be supported. And you believed that," I observed without judgment, "just as he believed I was worthless without him. We all make miscalculations, Ms. Winters. The true measure of character is what we do after we recognize our errors." I left her with that thought, closing the door quietly behind me. In the hallway, Lisa Jo was waiting with an update on the client communication strategy. "The initial responses have been mostly positive," she reported as we walked toward my temporary office. "A few concerns about continuity, but nothing serious yet." "Excellent. Schedule a virtual town hall for all associates and support staff for tomorrow morning. It's important they hear directly from leadership about our vision moving forward." My phone buzzed again, Richard with an update on David's exit process. He was refusing to leave voluntarily, demanding to speak with me first. I sighed, knowing this confrontation was inevitable. "Have him escorted to my office in 15 minutes, I instructed. "And make sure security remains outside the door." When David finally appeared, he was a shadow of the confident, arrogant man who had called me worthless just yesterday. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his entire demeanor deflated. "Eliza," he began, remaining standing even after I gestured to a chair. "You have to stop this. You're destroying everything I've built." "Everything we've built," I corrected gently. "Drake and Associates will emerge stronger, more ethical, and more profitable from these changes." "This isn't about the firm," he growled, frustration momentarily overriding his distress. "This is about us, about revenge. You're punishing me for calling me worthless, for cheating with a junior associate, for systematically undermining my confidence and contributions for years?" I shook my head. "This isn't about revenge, David. It's about justice. For me, yes, but also for every person who's been harmed by the toxic culture you and Hernandez cultivated." He ran his hands through his hair, desperation evident in every movement. "What do you want? Money? I'll sign whatever prenup you want. Just stop this takeover." "It's already done," I replied calmly. "The paperwork finalizing your termination has been processed. Your personal belongings are being packed as we speak. As for our marriage," I opened a drawer and removed a manila envelope. "These are divorce papers, standard division of assets, though given what my attorneys uncovered about your financial affairs, I'm being quite generous." David stared at the envelope as if it might bite him. "You can't just erase 10 years of marriage?" "No," I agreed softly. "Those years happened. I learned from them. I grew despite them. But they're over now, just like your time at Drake and Associates." He finally sank into a chair, the reality of his situation seemingly hitting him all at once. "What am I supposed to do now? My reputation in the legal community will be destroyed." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the compassion that had once drawn me to him, before his ambition and insecurity had twisted him into someone unrecognizable. You'll do what countless people do after professional setbacks, David. You'll start over. You'll reflect on your mistakes. Perhaps you'll even learn from them. Security appeared discreetly at the door. It's time for you to go, I said gently. As he stood to leave, a final surge of defiance straightened his shoulders. You won't get away with this. The other partners, our clients, they won't accept you just waltzing in and taking over. I smiled. A genuine smile this time. They already have. But I appreciate your concern for the firm's well-being, misplaced though it may be. He had no response to that, no clever retort or legal threat. With one last look at the office that would never be his again, David Morrison walked out of my professional and personal life. I sat alone for several minutes afterward, allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had transpired. This wasn't how I'd imagined my marriage ending, wasn't the future I'd once dreamed of when I said I do on that sun-dappled day in the Chicago Botanic Garden, but as I looked out at the city skyline, at the empire I'd built while playing the role of the supportive, decorative wife, I felt something unexpected, not triumph or vindication, but peace. I had reclaimed my worth, not in David's eyes, that had never been possible, but in my own. My phone buzzed with a notification. Audrey Winters had accepted the Director of Associate Development position. I felt a complex mix of emotions at this. Development, satisfaction that my assessment of her character had been correct, coupled with a strange sense of symmetry. The woman who had been a symptom of Drake and Associates' toxic culture would now help cure it. The last of the terminated executives have left the building, Marcus reported, appearing in my doorway. Though I suspect we haven't heard the last from them. I'd be disappointed if we had, I replied, gathering my things. People don't surrender. Power without a fight. Speaking of fights, Hernandez is already reaching out to other partners about challenging the acquisition. He's claiming the share structure was misrepresented. I smiled, unsurprised. Let him try. Every document is ironclad, every transaction meticulously recorded. In the meantime, let's focus on stabilizing client relationships and introducing the new leadership structure. As we walked through the executive floor, I could feel the curious stares of remaining employees, some fearful, others hopeful, all uncertain about what these dramatic changes meant for their futures. Schedule individual meetings with all senior associates for tomorrow, I instructed Lisa, who had seamlessly transitioned into the role of my executive assistant. I want to hear directly from them about the challenges they've been facing and their ideas for improvement. Already on the calendar, she confirmed, and Ms. Winters asked if she could start tomorrow rather than waiting until next week. Tell her that works perfectly. I'd like her to join the town hall meeting. By the time I left Drake and Associates, that evening, the initial shockwaves of the takeover had begun to settle into a more focused anxiety. The first phase of our plan had been executed flawlessly, but I harbored no illusions about the challenges ahead. Transforming a deeply entrenched culture would require more than just removing toxic leadership. It would demand consistent, transparent demonstration of different values. The Chicago traffic was heavy as I drove home, giving me time to reflect on the day's events. For 10 years, I'd lived a compartmentalized life. Eliza Morrison, decorative wife, and E.C. Winters, financial powerhouse. The relief of finally integrating those identities was profound. Like setting down a heavy weight I'd carried for so long, I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. When I reached the penthouse, I found it eerily quiet. David's presence had always filled our home with a particular energy, demanding, sometimes suffocating but familiar. Without it, the space felt both emptier and somehow larger, full of possibilities. I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of the Macallan 25, David's precious scotch that he'd never let me touch. As I sipped it, savoring the complex, notes of dried fruit and oak, my phone rang. James Winters, my CFO. Elizabeth, he began without preamble. Hernandez just filed an emergency injunction attempting to block the restructuring. His attorneys are claiming fraud and misrepresentation. I moved to my home office, activating the secure computer system. Send me the filing, and get Richard on a conference call in 15 minutes. The legal challenge was exactly what we'd anticipated, a desperate attempt to regain control through the courts when direct methods had failed. Hernandez's filing was full of righteous indignation, but light on substantive legal arguments. By the time Richard joined our call, I'd already identified 3 fatal flaws in their case. This will be dismissed within 48 hours, Richard confirmed after reviewing the documents. They're claiming they didn't understand the implications of the restructuring, but their own signatures on the disclosure documents contradict that argument. Nevertheless, we should prepare for more creative challenges, I cautioned. Men like Hernandez and David don't accept defeat easily, especially at the hands of a woman they underestimated. After the call, I moved through the penthouse, suddenly seeing it with fresh eyes. Every piece of art, every stick of furniture reflected David's taste. Or rather, the taste he thought appropriate for a successful corporate attorney. Modern, sleek, impressive but ultimately cold and impersonal. On impulse, I entered the guest bedroom that had served as my retreat when David's presence became too overbearing. Unlike the rest of our home, this space contained touches of my true self. Books David had dismissed as too academic, photographs I'd taken during solitary walks through the city, a small jade plant that had survived against all odds in the north-facing window. I decided then that I wouldn't keep the penthouse after the divorce. Like my marriage, it had been a beautiful facade concealing an empty core. It was time for a fresh start in a space that reflected my authentic self, not the carefully constructed character I'd played for David's benefit. My phone buzzed again. AI text from Marcus with a link to a legal blog already reporting on the dramatic shakeup at Drake & Associates. The comments section was filled with speculation and insider gossip, much of it painting me as a vengeful wife, using her wealth to punish her cheating husband. If only they knew how much larger this was than one failed marriage or wounded pride. Slept fitfully that night, waking before dawn with my mind already racing through the day ahead. The town hall meeting would be critical in setting the tone for Drake & Associates' transformation. I dressed with deliberate care, a tailored burgundy suit that projected authority without intimidation, paired with my grandmother's jade pendant, openly displayed rather than hidden beneath my blouse. By the time I arrived at the office, the executive floor was already humming with activity. The restructuring team had worked through the night, preparing detailed transition plans for each department. Hernandez gave an interview to the Chicago Legal Daily. Lisa informed me as she handed me a coffee prepared exactly as I liked it, something David had never bothered to learn despite a decade of marriage. He's calling the takeover an unprecedented attack on the independence of the legal profession. I skimmed the article, noting with amusement that Hernandez had carefully avoided mentioning any of the ethical violations we'd documented. Forward this to Richard's team. We may need to prepare. A measured response after the town hall. Audrey Winters was waiting in my office, her composure restored, but a new wariness evident in her posture. She stood as I entered, her handshake firm despite her obvious nervousness. "Thank you for coming in early," I greeted her. "I thought we should align on messaging before the town hall." "Of course," she replied, taking a seat only after I did, a small but telling indication of the new power dynamic between us. "I've reviewed the organizational restructuring plan. It's impressive, ambitious, but necessary," I added. "Drake & Associates has operated on an outdated model that rewards specific types of behavior and penalizes others. You've experienced this firsthand." She flinched slightly but didn't deny it. "May I speak frankly?" I nodded, curious about what she would say. "I made choices I'm not proud of," she began carefully. "When I realized that merit alone wouldn't advance my career, I adapted to the system as it existed. I'm not excusing my relationship with David, but I want you to understand I'm under no illusions about what was happening. You were playing the game by their rules, I acknowledged. Now I'm changing the rules. The question is whether you can adapt to a different system, one where advancement is based on talent and contribution, rather than politics and personal relationships. Her gaze was direct, unflinching. I'd like the opportunity to find out. That's why you're here, I replied simply. Now, let's discuss your role in today's town hall. As the new Director of Associate Development, you represent the future we're building. I'd like you to speak specifically about the mentorship program we're establishing. For the next half hour, we outlined a vision for Drake and Associates that emphasized collaboration over competition, diversity over homogeneity, and integrity over expediency. By the time we finished, Audrey's initial wariness had given way to cautious enthusiasm. I never imagined this kind of transformation was possible, she admitted as we prepared to head to the auditorium where the town hall would be held, even in my most optimistic moments. That's by design, I told her. Systems of inequality persist partly because those within them can't envision alternatives. Our first task is to make a different future not just possible, but inevitable. The auditorium was filled to capacity when we arrived, buzzing with the nervous energy of people whose professional lives had been suddenly upended. I felt hundreds of eyes tracking my movement as I took the stage, Audrey and the executive team arrayed behind me. Good morning, I began, my voice calm and measured. I recognize that the past 24 hours have been disorienting for many of you. Sudden change, especially change that affects your livelihood, creates understandable anxiety. I paused, making eye contact with various sections of the audience. Drake and Associates has a proud history and exceptional talent. What it has lacked is leadership worthy of that talent. Leadership that recognizes excellence regardless of gender, background, or willingness to participate in a culture of exclusion. A murmur ran through the crowd, part surprise, part recognition, of hard truths finally spoken aloud. Today marks the beginning of a transformation. Some of you will welcome these changes. Others will resist them. Both reactions are natural. What I ask is that you judge this new direction by its results rather than by rumors or speculation. For the next hour, my team and I outlined specific changes, a comprehensive review of all compensation to identify and correct gender and racial disparities, a revamped promotion process with transparent criteria, and a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and discrimination. When it was Audrey's turn to speak, she stepped forward with quiet confidence. Many of you know me, she began. Some of you may have heard rumors about me. Today, I stand before you not to explain or defend my past choices, but to help create a future where no associate feels they must compromise their dignity to advance their career. Her candor seemed to resonate with the audience, particularly the younger associates whose expressions shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. After the formal presentations, we opened the floor for questions. They came rapidly, some pointed, others genuinely curious about how these changes would affect daily operations. I answered each one directly, refusing to hide behind corporate jargon or vague reassurances. What about our clients? Asked a senior associate from the tax department. Won't they be concerned about stability during this transition? Some will, I acknowledged. That's why we've already reached out to each of your top clients personally. What we found is that most are more concerned with the quality of their representation than with who sits in the corner offices. Another hand raised, a junior associate I recognized from personnel files as someone with exceptional credentials but limited case assignments. Will there be reviews of current workload? Distribution? Some of us have been overlooked for significant projects. Absolutely, Audrey responded before I could. That review begins today. My office door is open to anyone who feels their skills haven't been fully utilized. By the time the town hall concluded, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably from tense apprehension to cautious optimism. Not universal acceptance, certainly. I noticed several senior associates huddled in corners, expressions dark with disapproval, but enough momentum to build upon. That went better than expected, Marcus observed as we returned to the executive floor. Though I counted at least 15 people who looked ready to update their resumes. Let them, I replied. This transition was never going to retain everyone. Some are too invested in the old system to function in the new one. Lisa met us at the elevator with updates. 3 clients had called to express support for the changes. A federal judge had denied Hernandez's emergency injunction as legally insufficient, and David had been spotted meeting with attorneys from a rival firm. He's likely trying to take clients with him, James observed. Let him try, I said, unconcerned. Our client agreements have strong non-solicitation clauses, and given the circumstances of his departure, any attempt to circumvent those would only strengthen our position. The remainder of the day passed, in a blur of meetings, strategic planning sessions, and crisis management. By evening, we had weathered the initial storm and begun implementing the structural changes that would transform Drake and Associates from within. As I prepared to leave, Audrey appeared in my doorway looking exhausted but determined. I've been reviewing the associate files, she said, entering when I waved her in. The pattern of discrimination is even worse than I realized. Some of these women have billable hours and client development statistics that far outpace their male counterparts, yet they've been consistently passed over for lead counsel positions. Not surprising, I replied, gathering my things. The system was designed to appear meritocratic while maintaining existing power structures. Your job is to dismantle that system, carefully but completely. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. There's something I've been wondering all day. You knew about David and me, about everything that was happening here. You were building this takeover for months, maybe years. Why wait? Why endure it for so long? I considered her question seriously, recognizing the genuine curiosity behind it. Timing, I finally answered. Meaningful change requires more than just removing problematic individuals. It requires creating the conditions where better systems can take root and flourish. I needed to understand the depth of the dysfunction, gather irrefutable evidence, and assemble the right team before making my move. It wasn't the complete truth, but it was enough for now. The full answer was more complex, involving years of careful planning, strategic investments, and the patient accumulation of influence across Chicago's financial and legal communities. Some stories were still mine alone to know. Will you be here tomorrow? She asked as we walked toward the elevator. Every day for the foreseeable future, I confirmed. This transformation won't happen overnight, and it won't succeed without consistent leadership. Outside, the spring evening was unexpectedly mild, the last light of day catching on the glass and steel of Chicago's skyline. Instead of driving home to the penthouse, I directed my car toward the lake, finding a quiet spot along the shore to watch the sunset. 10 years of my life had been dedicated to building 2 separate identities, the accommodating wife and the ruthless CEO. Now, those identities were merging, creating something new that was neither fully one nor the other. Who was Elizabeth Chen without the mask of Eliza Morrison or the anonymity of E.C. Winters? It was a question I hadn't allowed myself to consider until now. My phone buzzed with a text from David. We need to talk, please. This isn't just about us anymore. I deleted it without responding. Whatever David thought he needed to say could be communicated through attorneys. Our personal relationship was over. Only the legal dissolution remained. Instead, I called my mother, something I hadn't done often enough during my marriage, partly because David had found her provincial and discouraged her visits. Lizzie, she answered on the second ring, her voice warm with surprise. Is everything all right? You never call on weeknights. Everything's changing, Mom, I told her, watching the orange sun sink into Lake Michigan. I've left David, or rather, I've asked him to leave. Her silence spoke volumes. She had never fully approved of David, but had respected my choices enough to keep her concerns private. "Are you okay?" she finally asked, her voice gentle but not pitying. "I'm better than okay," I replied, realizing, as I said it, that it was true. "I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be. Your father would be so proud," she said softly. "He always said you had steel in your spine, even when you were little." The mention of my father brought a tightness to my throat. "I wish he could see what I've built." "He can see," she assured me with the quiet certainty of her unwavering faith. "Now tell me everything." So I did. Not the financial details or legal strategies, but the emotional journey from being called worthless to reclaiming my worth in the most definitive way possible. She listened without interruption, offering neither judgment nor advice, simply the gift of her attention. "Will you come visit soon?" I asked as our conversation wound down. "I'm looking for a new place, something that's truly mine." "Just try to keep me away," she laughed. "I've been waiting 10 years to help you. Decorate a home that doesn't look like a furniture showroom." After we hung up, I remained by the lake, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles with Hernandez and his allies, new complications in the restructuring process. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not split between personas, not calculating every word and gesture, simply present in my own truth. My phone buzzed again. Marcus, with an alert about a potential legal countermove from Hernandez. The real world, intruding on my moment of peace. I sighed, returning to my car. The journey ahead would be neither easy nor straight, but at least I was finally walking it as myself. The next morning arrived with the first real test of our restructuring plan. Overnight, Hernandez had convinced 3 major clients to threaten withdrawal unless the traditional leadership was reinstated. Their letters, nearly identical in wording, suggested coordinated pressure rather than independent decisions. "It's a calculated move," Richard observed during our emergency strategy meeting. "These clients represent about 15% of annual revenue. Significant, but not catastrophic if they actually leave." "They won't leave," I replied confidently. "At least not all of them. This is a negotiating tactic, not a genuine threat. Schedule individual meetings with each client's decision makers. No lawyers, no entourage, just me." Marcus looked skeptical. "Hernandez has deep relationships with these clients, personal friendships that go back decades." "And I have something more valuable than friendship," I countered. "Data. Specifically, data showing that they've been systematically overcharged for years. We're going to offer them a choice: stay with the new management and receive a substantial fee adjustment, or leave and face potential litigation over billing irregularities." "That's aggressive," James noted with raised eyebrows. "It's fair," I corrected. "We're not threatening them. We're offering a legitimate business choice. The fact that one option is clearly better than the other is simply good negotiation strategy." While Lisa arranged the client meetings, I turned my attention to internal matters. True to Marcus's prediction, resignation letters had begun arriving from associates and partners too invested in the old regime to function in the new. 1. Each departure created both challenges and opportunities. Institutional knowledge lost, but toxic influence removed. "We need to accelerate lateral hiring," I told Audrey during our morning check-in. "Focus on attorneys with sterling reputations who've been marginalized at traditional firms. Offer them equity stakes and genuine leadership opportunities." She nodded, taking notes. "I've already identified several promising candidates, including some former Drake associates who left due to the culture. They're cautiously interested, but want to see proof that the changes are permanent." "Understandable," I acknowledged. "Actions will speak louder than promises. In the meantime, keep them engaged and informed." As Audrey left, Lisa appeared with an update that made my heart skip. David had filed a separate legal action challenging my right to represent Winterfall Capital in corporate matters, claiming that as my spouse, he had a community property interest in my business decisions. It's a desperate move, Richard assured me after reviewing the filing. Illinois isn't a community property state, and your corporate structures were established, with clear separation of personal and business assets. Still, we should be prepared for more creative attempts to undermine your authority. I wasn't surprised by David's tactics, merely disappointed that he'd chosen such a transparent ploy. In our 11 years together, he'd never shown interest in understanding my financial acumen or business activities. Now he was claiming partial ownership of decisions he'd previously dismissed as cute hobbies. The first client meeting was scheduled for noon. Jonathan Kellerman himself, the pharmaceutical executive whose account had been at the center of David's ethical breaches. I reviewed his file one last time, refreshing my memory on the specific irregularities we'd documented. Kellerman arrived precisely on time, a tall, austere man whose carefully neutral expression couldn't quite mask his curiosity. Ms. Chen, he greeted me with a firm handshake. Or should I say Ms. Winters? The professional world seems confused about what to call you these days. Elizabeth is fine, I replied, gesturing him to a seat. Thank you for meeting with me personally. Stanley. Hernandez has been my attorney for 20 years, he stated flatly. He advised my first corporate acquisition and helped navigate my divorce. I trust him. As you should, in many matters, I acknowledged. Mr. Hernandez is an experienced attorney with valuable expertise. What he is not, however, is an ethical billing manager. I opened a folder and removed a single document, sliding it across to him. This is a comparison of your actual legal expenses over the past 5 years versus industry standard costs for identical services. The discrepancy amounts to approximately $3.7 million in overcharges. Kellerman's expression remained impassive as he studied the document, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. These are serious allegations. They are facts, Mr. Kellerman. Facts supported by internal records, timesheets, and witness statements. Facts that we have no desire to publicize or litigate, provided we can establish a more transparent relationship moving forward. His eyes narrowed slightly. This feels like blackmail. It's a business proposition, I corrected calmly. You can remain with Drake & Associates under new management that prioritizes ethical billing and transparent client relationships, or you can follow Mr. Hernandez to whatever firm will have him, knowing what you now know about his billing practices. He studied me with new intensity, reassessing. You're nothing like the woman I met at David's partner dinner last year. I'm exactly the same woman, I replied with a small smile. I was simply playing a role then. Now I'm playing myself. Something shifted in his expression, respect perhaps, or at least a businessman's recognition of a well-executed strategy. What guarantees do I have that these new billing practices will continue once this transition period settles? Complete audit access to all billable hours related to your matters, quarterly reviews with independent verification, and my personal guarantee, which, as you may have discovered from your undoubtedly thorough research, this morning has never been broken in any business context. By the time Kellerman left an hour later, he had not only agreed to remain with Drake & Associates, but had expanded our engagement to include a pending acquisition his company was exploring. 1 down, 2 to go. The remaining client meetings followed. A similar pattern, initial resistance, followed by strategic disclosure of documentation, culminating in renewed commitment to the firm under new management. By late afternoon, all 3 supposedly departing clients had been secured. Hernandez is furious, Marcus reported with barely concealed satisfaction. Apparently, he'd already begun setting up offices for himself at Latimer and Price, promising to bring these clients with him. I nodded, unsurprised. His leverage just evaporated. More importantly, word will spread quickly through client circles about our commitment to ethical billing practices. That's the kind of reputation that builds sustainable business. Victories were tempered by news that David's legal challenge, while substantively weak, would require formal response and potentially court appearances. I authorized Richard to handle the matter, preferring to focus my energy on rebuilding Drake and Associates rather than fighting rearguard actions against my soon-to-be ex-husband. As evening approached, Audrey appeared in my doorway with a thick "Carter." "I've completed the first phase of the associate review," she announced, placing it on my desk. As expected, we found significant disparities in assignment quality, compensation, and promotion track. What I didn't expect was how meticulously these disparities were disguised to appear performance-based. I opened the folder, scanning the detailed analysis. Systemic discrimination is always carefully camouflaged. Otherwise, it wouldn't survive. Scrutiny. "There's something else," she added, her expression troubled. "The pattern extends beyond gender to include racial and ethnic disparities. Some of our most talented associates of color have been deliberately sidelined, their contributions attributed to white colleagues. This wasn't surprising, but seeing it documented so thoroughly reinforced the importance of our transformation effort. Prepare a comprehensive remediation plan. Back pay where appropriate, promotion reconsideration, and immediate reassignment to showcase opportunities." Audrey nodded, looking simultaneously exhausted and energized. "I've already started. The first corrective promotions could be announced by next week if you approve." "Make it a priority," I confirmed. "Visible changes build credibility for our broader vision." After she left, I sat alone in the growing twilight, contemplating the magnitude of what we were attempting. Changing a deeply entrenched culture wasn't simply a matter of removing toxic leadership or implementing new policies. It required sustained effort, consistent messaging, and the courage to make difficult decisions that might appear risky in the short term but would strengthen the organization over time. My phone buzzed with a notification that made me pause. David had posted a lengthy statement on his professional social media accounts, portraying himself as the victim of a vindictive wife's irrational jealousy. The post carefully avoided mentioning any of the documented ethical violations, focusing instead on his unwavering commitment to client service and decades of building Drake & Associates into a premier firm. I forwarded the post to Richard with a single instruction. No response. David was counting on me to react publicly, to engage in a messy personal fight that would distract from the substantive issues and reinforce his narrative of emotional vengeance. It was exactly the kind of trap I'd avoided for years by maintaining my separate identities. Now, with those identities merged, the temptation to defend myself was stronger, but still one I would resist. Let him rant into the void. My response would be in actions, not words. In rebuilt careers for those he'd sidelined, in ethical representation for clients he'd overcharged, in a transformed firm culture that would stand as living refutation of everything he claimed to value. Gathered my things, ready to leave for the day, when Lisa appeared with one final update. "Audrey asked me to let you know that she's completed the preliminary interviews with the female associates who filed internal complaints that were ignored. She says it's worse than we thought. Multiple incidents involving David specifically. I absorbed this information with outward calm, though it triggered a complex mix of emotions. Not surprise. I'd suspected David's inappropriate behavior extended beyond Audrey, but a deep sadness for the women who had suffered while I built my separate life, constructing my elaborate plan for transformation rather than confronting the immediate harm. Have her prepare detailed reports, anonymized to protect privacy. We'll need to make decisions about potential settlements and support services." After Lisa left, I sat back down, suddenly weighed by the human cost of the system I'd been fighting. For years, I'd focused on the big picture, building Winterfall capital, accumulating the resources and influence necessary to effect systemic change. Had I waited too long? Could I have prevented some of this suffering by moving sooner, even with less leverage? These questions had no simple answers, no clear moral calculus to apply. I had made choices based on the information and resources available at each moment, balancing immediate intervention against long-term impact. Now I could only move forward, working to heal the damage while preventing its recurrence. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. David was just escorted from the building, attempted to access his old office after hours. Security followed protocol. Sighed, picturing David's desperation and anger. The man I'd married had been ambitious and occasionally insensitive, but not cruel. Somewhere along the way, success had corrupted him, power had warped his perspective, and the system had rewarded his worst instincts until they became his defining characteristics. Was the system to blame? Or had those darker qualities always been there, merely waiting for the right environment to flourish? Another unanswerable question to add to my collection. I left the office as twilight deepened into evening, the city lights coming alive against the darkening sky. Instead of returning to the penthouse, I drove to a quiet bistro in Lincoln Park, a place David had always dismissed as too bohemian for his taste. The hostess seated me at a small corner table with a good view of both the street and the restaurant interior. I ordered a glass of Pinot Noir and the mushroom risotto, then settled in to watch the ordinary magic of everyday life, couples leaning close in conversation, friends laughing over shared jokes, individuals absorbed in books or thoughts. For so long, I'd lived at a remove from this kind of simple authenticity, always calculating, always performing, always carefully managing my dual identities. The prospect of living as a single, integrated self, not E.C. Winters or Eliza Morrison, but Elizabeth Chen, complete and undivided, was both exhilarating and terrifying. My phone buzzed again. Not work this time, but my mother, sending a photo of a lakefront condo she'd spotted online. "This has your name all over it," read her message. "Natural light, views of the water, walking distance to that little bookstore you love." I smiled, saving the listing to review later. She was right. It looked perfect, serene, elegant without being showy, and completely different from the sleek modernist aesthetic David had insisted upon for our home. As I enjoyed my meal in solitary contentment, I realized I didn't feel alone, merely unaccompanied. There's a world of difference between the two states. Loneliness is an absence, but solitude is a presence, a completeness in oneself. Despite David's cruel assessment, I had never been worthless. I had simply allowed my worth to be defined by someone incapable of recognizing its true nature and extent. That mistake, at least, I would never repeat. My wine glass was nearly empty when I noticed a familiar figure entering the restaurant, Audrey Winters, looking tired but relaxed in casual clothes, accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize. They didn't notice me in my corner table, and I made no move to draw attention to myself, simply observing as they were seated across the room. There was an easy familiarity in their interaction, suggesting a long-standing relationship rather than a casual acquaintance. As they leaned toward each other, laughing at some shared joke, I felt a sudden insight. This wasn't just a friend, but a partner, someone Audrey had kept carefully separated from her professional life at Drake & Associates. The realization brought a new dimension to my understanding of her situation. She hadn't just been navigating the firm's toxic culture as a woman. She'd been managing the additional complexity of concealing an important part of her identity in an environment where difference of any kind was treated as weakness. I finished my meal without interrupting their evening, leaving the restaurant with a renewed sense of purpose. Our transformation of Drake & Associates wasn't just about gender equity or ethical client representation. It was about creating a workplace where people could bring their full, authentic selves without fear of punishment or marginalization. The Gyar. Night air was cool as I walked to my car, the city's energy humming around me. Chicago had been my home for 15 years, yet I felt as though I was seeing it with new eyes. Not as David Morrison's wife or as the reclusive E.C. Winters, but simply as Elizabeth Chen, a woman reclaiming her life one decision at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in the ongoing transformation of Drake & Associates. Hernandez would devise new counter-strategies. David would escalate his desperate attempts to undermine my authority. Former partners would spread rumors and foster resistance among remaining staff. But tonight, under the vast canopy of stars barely visible through the city's glow, I felt a profound peace. The path ahead might be difficult, but for the first time in years, it was truly my own, chosen freely, walked deliberately, and leading toward a future limited only by my own vision, rather than someone else's narrow assessment of my worth. My phone buzzed one last time as I reached my car, an email notification from Lisa. The subject line read simply, "Transition update, week 1 complete." Inside was a detailed summary of our progress. Clients retained, associates promoted, policies revised, toxic elements removed. At the bottom was a personal note. "I've worked at Drake for 7 years and never believed change was possible. Thanks you for proving me wrong. Lisa." Those simple words, more than any financial victory or strategic success, confirmed what I already knew in my heart. That worthiness isn't determined by others' assessments, but by the impact of our choices on the lives around us. As I drove toward the penthouse that would soon no longer be my home, I felt David's cruel label, worthless, finally lose its sting completely, replaced by the quiet certainty of my own value, defined not by what I owned or controlled, but by what I was helping to create. The second week of Drake & Associates. Transformation began with unexpected news. David had eloped with Audrey's former assistant, Vanessa Reed. The marriage announcement appeared in the legal section of the Chicago Tribune, accompanied by a carefully worded statement about finding happiness after betrayal and looking forward to building a meaningful future together. Marcus forwarded me the announcement with a single question mark. I didn't respond immediately, taking time to examine my reaction. I felt no jealousy, no sense of loss, only mild surprise at the hasty timing and a certain sadness for Vanessa, who had unwittingly stepped into a relationship with a man whose true character would likely reveal itself once the honeymoon phase ended. "It's a tactical move," Richard observed during our morning strategy meeting. "Getting married during divorce proceedings complicates the financial discovery process. He's trying to create leverage. He's also trying to control the narrative," I added. "David has always been obsessed with public perception. This is his attempt to reframe himself as the romantic hero rather than the disgraced attorney." James nodded in agreement. "From a financial perspective, it changes nothing. The prenuptial agreement remains enforceable, and Winterfall's corporate structure is still protected." I turned the conversation to more pressing matters: the ongoing client retention efforts, the associate remediation program, and the lateral hiring initiative that Audrey was spearheading. The restructuring was proceeding more smoothly than anticipated, with only minor resistance from the old guard who remained. After the meeting concluded, I found Audrey waiting outside my office, her expression troubled. "I just heard about David and Vanessa," she said once we were behind closed doors. "I feel responsible. Vanessa worked directly under me for 2 years. I should have warned her." "About what, specifically?" I asked, genuinely curious. "About David. About his pattern." She hesitated. "About how he pursued me when I was vulnerable, how he made promises he never intended to keep." I considered her words carefully. "Vanessa is an adult making her own choices, just as you did, just as I did. We can't protect others from experiences we've learned from ourselves, no matter how much we might wish to." "That's a remarkably generous perspective," she observed, studying me with new interest. "It's a practical one," I corrected gently. "Energy spent on regret is energy diverted from progress. Speaking of which, how are the lateral hiring initiatives proceeding?" She accepted, the change of subject with visible relief. "Better than expected. We've secured commitments from 3 senior attorneys from Latimer and Price, all women with exceptional credentials who were passed over for partnership. and 7 mid-level associates from various firms have accepted offers to join next month. Excellent. And the associate remediation program. The first round of promotions will be announced today. 5 associates who were previously overlooked despite meeting all qualifications. Their compensation has been adjusted retroactively, as you approved. I nodded, pleased with the progress. These early wins will build momentum. People respond to visible change more than to promises of future improvement. After Audrey left, I turned my attention to a delicate matter I'd been postponing, meeting with the associates who had filed internal complaints about David's behavior. Though their identities had been protected in Audrey's reports, they deserved the opportunity to speak directly with leadership about their experiences. Lisa had arranged for these conversations to take place in a neutral conference room away from the executive floor, with a trauma-informed HR consultant present to ensure the discussions remained supportive rather than investigative. Each woman would choose whether to meet with me individually or as part of a group. 4 had opted for individual meetings, while 3 preferred to speak together. I spent the morning listening to their stories, similar patterns of initial mentorship that gradually crossed professional boundaries, followed by either rejection or continued inappropriate relationships, all occurring within a system that tacitly rewarded compliance and punished resistance. Their courage in coming forward, even in this protected context, moved me deeply. Each had risked her professional future to speak truth about experiences that many would prefer to keep hidden. Each had persisted in her career despite obstacles that had nothing to do with talent or dedication. "What happens now?" asked Miranda. Chen, no relation, a 5th-year associate whose promising career had stalled after she rebuffed David's advances. "We appreciate the listening session, but previous management excelled at appearing to take concerns seriously while ensuring nothing. Actually changed." "That's a fair question," I acknowledged. "Here's what happens next. First, you'll each receive formal documentation acknowledging that your complaints were valid and should have been addressed when initially reported. Second, your personnel files will be reviewed for any retaliatory performance evaluations, which will be removed. Third, you'll be prioritized for advancement opportunities that align with your career goals without any obligation to accept them." "And David?" asked another associate, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "He's married again already. Building a new life as if nothing happened." I met her gaze directly. "David's professional reputation is irreparably damaged. His legal challenges against the firm are failing. His attempts to take clients have been unsuccessful. Most importantly, the system that protected him has been dismantled. That may not feel like sufficient justice, and perhaps it isn't, but it's the reality we can create within our professional context." The meetings left me emotionally drained, but more committed than ever to the transformation we were undertaking. This wasn't just about changing policies or leadership. It was about healing deep wounds inflicted by years of systemic failure. As I returned to my office, Lisa intercepted me with an update that momentarily broke through my professional composure. Vanessa Reed, now Vanessa Morrison, had applied for an open position at Drake & Associates. "She what?" I asked, certain. I had misheard. "Submitted a formal application for the Client Relations Director position," Lisa confirmed, handing me the file. Her resume is actually quite strong. 5 years at Latimer & Price before joining Drake as Audrey's assistant. Advanced degree in communications. Excellent references. I took the file, scanning it quickly. On paper, Vanessa was indeed well qualified for the role, perhaps even the strongest candidate based on experience alone. But the complexity of having David's new wife working at the firm he'd been forced to leave created obvious concerns. "Schedule an interview," I decided after careful consideration. "Standard protocol, same as any other candidate." Lisa looked surprised. "You're actually considering her?" "I'm considering everyone with appropriate qualifications," I replied. "Rejecting? Her application outright would contradict the merit-based culture we're trying to build." The interview was scheduled for the following afternoon. standard format with an initial screening by HR, followed by a panel interview with department leaders, and finally a one-on-one with me if she progressed that far. I expected Vanessa to withdraw her application once she realized who owned the firm, but the morning brought notification that she had completed the HR screening and impressed the panel sufficiently to advance to the final interview. At precisely 3 o'clock, Lisa showed Vanessa into my office. She was younger than I had imagined, perhaps 30, with a poised confidence that surprised me given the circumstances. She showed no sign of discomfort as she took the offered seat, meeting my gaze directly. "Ms. Reed," I began, then corrected, myself. "Or do you prefer Morrison now?" "Reed Morrison professionally," she replied smoothly. "Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Chen. I appreciate the opportunity to be considered on my merits rather than my personal connections." Her directness was refreshing, if unexpected. "Let's address the elephant in the room," I suggested. "You recently married David Morrison, my soon-to-be ex-husband, who was terminated from this firm under challenging circumstances. That creates an unusual dynamic for this position." She nodded, entirely unruffled. "I understand how it appears. Before we proceed, I want to be clear about 2 things. First, I applied for this position before David and I decided to get married. The timing was coincidental, not strategic. Second, I am fully aware of the circumstances surrounding David's departure and the ongoing transformation of the firm. This was not at all what I had expected. You're aware that David engaged in inappropriate relationships with associates, including my former boss, that he participated in discriminatory promotion practices and questionable client billing, that he's currently challenging your authority in court while simultaneously trying to rebuild his reputation?" She smiled slightly. "Yes, I'm aware." I studied her with new interest. "And knowing all this, you married him and still want to work here. People contain multitudes, Ms. Chen. David has significant flaws and has made serious mistakes. He's also capable of growth and change with the right influence. As for working here," she gestured around the office, "you're creating something revolutionary. Who wouldn't want to be part of that?" Her answer was either remarkably genuine or exceptionally calculated. Either way, it demonstrated an emotional intelligence that would serve the client relations position well. "Let's discuss your qualifications," I suggested, turning to her file. For the next 30 minutes, we engaged in a substantive conversation about client experience management, communication strategies, and relationship building in professional services contexts. Her responses were thoughtful, specific, and grounded in both theory and practical experience. By the time our scheduled time concluded, I had to admit she was genuinely the strongest candidate for the position. "I have one last question," I said, as she prepared to leave. "If offered this position, how would you handle the inevitable awkwardness of working for your husband's ex-wife?" Vanessa considered the question seriously. "With transparent professionalism, I would establish clear boundaries between my personal and professional lives. I would recuse myself from any matters directly involving David, and I would understand that any perception of divided loyalty would undermine my effectiveness. So I would work to demonstrate my commitment to the firm's new direction through consistent action rather than declarations." After she left, I sat in silence for several minutes, weighing options and implications. Hiring Vanessa carried obvious risks: potential divided loyalty, perception problems, and the sheer awkwardness of the situation. Yet rejecting a supremely qualified candidate solely because of her personal relationship would violate the meritocratic principles we were trying to establish. I called Marcus, Richard, and James into my office for an emergency consultation. "You can't be seriously considering this," Marcus objected after I outlined the situation. "It's a trap, a way for David to plant someone inside our operations. That assumes Vanessa is merely David's proxy rather than an independent professional with her own career aspirations," I pointed out. Richard was more measured. Legally, rejecting her application based solely on her marriage could create exposure to discrimination claims. We'd need to document substantial non-marital reasons if we decide against hiring her, which we don't have, James added reluctantly. Based on her resume and interview assessments, she's objectively the most qualified candidate. We debated for nearly an hour, examining the situation from every angle. Eventually, I made my decision. We'll offer her the position with specific parameters: enhanced confidentiality agreements, recusal from any matters involving David, and a clear understanding that any evidence of information sharing will result in immediate termination. My team looked skeptical but accepted the decision. As they filed out, James lingered behind. "This is either the most enlightened decision you've ever made or the most naive," he observed. "I'm not sure which yet." I smiled slightly. "Neither am I. But I know which kind of leader I want to be. One who judges people by their demonstrated abilities rather than their personal connections, even when those connections are complicated." The offer was extended to Vanessa the following morning, complete with the additional parameters we had established. She accepted without hesitation or negotiation, agreeing to all terms and expressing gratitude for the opportunity. While this professional drama unfolded, my personal life was undergoing its own transformation. I had found a lakefront condo that resonated with my authentic aesthetic: warm woods, natural light, and stunning water views. The purchase proceeded quickly, financed entirely through my Winterfall assets, rather than any resources connected to David. My mother arrived from Minneapolis to help with the transition, bringing her practical Midwestern sensibilities and unwavering support. Together, we selected furniture, artwork, and decor that reflected my true tastes, rather than the minimalist modernity David had preferred. "I never understood how you lived in that steel and glass box he called home," she commented as we arranged books on the built-in shelves in my new living room. "It was like a museum where you couldn't touch anything." "That was the point," I replied, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. David wanted a showcase, not a home. A perfect setting that reflected his success. She handed me a framed photograph of my father, the one David had always relegated to my private office because he thought it didn't match the aesthetic. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said softly. "Not because of your success, though that too, but because you've finally claimed your own space in the world." The divorce proceedings advanced in parallel with these personal changes. David's attempts to claim partial ownership of Winterfall Capital were summarily dismissed by the court, and his subsequent petitions for reconsideration were rejected, with increasingly pointed language from the judge. With his legal maneuvers failing, David shifted tactics, offering to settle the divorce quickly and quietly in exchange for a consulting role at Drake & Associates. "Absolutely not," was my immediate response when Richard presented the offer. "The divorce settlement will follow the prenuptial agreement exactly as written. No modifications, no side arrangements, no consulting roles." The message was delivered, and within days, David's attorney submitted revised settlement terms that aligned with the original prenuptial parameters. The divorce would be finalized within 30 days, legally ending a relationship that had emotionally concluded the moment David called me worthless. Meanwhile, Drake & Associates continued its transformation. The Associate Remediation Program had identified 23 attorneys whose careers had been artificially suppressed by the old regime. Each received appropriate promotions, compensation, adjustments, and opportunities to lead significant matters. Client reactions to these changes had been overwhelmingly positive, with several specifically requesting diverse legal teams for their matters. The ethical billing initiative had resulted in more transparent client relationships and, surprisingly, increased profitability as associates felt empowered to accurately report their work, rather than conforming to arbitrary expectations. Vanessa started her new role with remarkable professionalism, quickly establishing herself as both competent and committed to the firm's new direction. She maintained scrupulous boundaries, never mentioning David or our past connection unless directly relevant to client concerns. One morning, about a month after Vanessa joined the firm, Audrey appeared in my doorway with an unexpected request. "Need your advice," she began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "About Vanessa." I gestured for her to enter and close the door. "Professional or personal?" "Both." She sat down, visibly uncomfortable. "She was my assistant for 2 years, including during my relationship with David. Now she's married to him and working here in a senior role. I'm not sure how to navigate this." I considered her dilemma thoughtfully. The complex interconnection between our professional and personal lives created genuine challenges not easily resolved with standard management advice. "Have you spoken with her directly about your concerns?" I asked. Audrey shook her head. "I've been avoiding her, which isn't sustainable given our roles." "Then start there," I suggested. "Request a private meeting. Acknowledge the awkwardness. Directly. Establish professional boundaries that allow you both to function effectively despite the personal complications." "That's very rational," she observed with a small smile. "But what if the emotions involved aren't rational?" "They rarely are," I acknowledged. "Which is why professional structures matter. Create a framework for your working relationship that doesn't rely on emotional comfort but on clear expectations and responsibilities." She nodded slowly. "I'll try that approach. Thank you for not dismissing the complexity of the situation." After she left, I reflected on the intricate human ecosystem we were creating, one where past relationships and future aspirations intertwined in ways that no organizational chart could fully capture. The transformation of Drake & Associates wasn't just about policies and promotions. It was about building a community where complex human realities could be acknowledged and accommodated, rather than suppressed or exploited. The following week brought a significant milestone, our first quarterly client satisfaction survey since the restructuring began. The results exceeded even our optimistic projections, with 87% of clients reporting increased satisfaction with the firm's responsiveness, transparency, and value delivery. Most telling were the comments from long-standing clients who had initially expressed concern about the leadership changes. "The quality of work remains excellent, but the communication has improved dramatically. For the first time in 15 years, I feel like I understand exactly what I'm paying for and why." The diverse team assigned to our matters has brought fresh perspectives that have already saved us millions in potential exposure. We celebrated these results with an all-staff gathering, recognizing that the firm's transformation had been a collective achievement requiring adaptation and commitment from everyone who had remained through the changes. Standing before the assembled team, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not the vindictive satisfaction of having proved David wrong, but the deeper fulfillment of having created something genuinely valuable from the ashes of his dismissal. 6 weeks ago, I began, I stood before many of you as a stranger, representing changes that seemed threatening and disruptive. Today, we stand together as architects of a new kind of legal practice, one built on transparency, equity, and excellence that doesn't require the sacrifice of dignity or authenticity. The applause that followed wasn't the polite, obligatory kind that often accompanies corporate speeches. It was genuine, spontaneous, and infused with a collective energy that suggested real cultural change was taking hold. After the celebration, as I gathered my things to head home, Vanessa appeared in my doorway. It was the first time she had sought me out directly since starting her role. "Do you have a moment?" she asked, her usual poise slightly diminished by what appeared to be genuine nervousness. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the visitor's chair. "What can I help with?" She closed the door before taking a seat, a signal that this wasn't a routine professional matter. "I owe you an explanation," she began carefully. "About David, about why I married him knowing what I know. I shook my head slightly. You don't owe me any explanations about your personal life, Vanessa. As long as it doesn't affect your professional performance, which it hasn't, your relationship with David is your business. Nevertheless, I want you to understand. She straightened, meeting my gaze directly. I knew David for 3 years before anything romantic developed between us. I saw how he operated. I saw what happened with Audrey and others. I saw the toxic culture he perpetuated. And yet, I prompted gently when she paused. And yet I also saw someone capable of change when properly motivated. A small, determined smile curved her lips. David responds to power. He respects it, craves it, orients himself toward it. When you demonstrated your power by taking control of the firm, you fundamentally altered his understanding of the world. He's different now. I found this perspective fascinating, if somewhat difficult to reconcile with my experience of David's character. Different how, exactly? Humbled, reflective, open to guidance from someone he perceives as strong. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not naive, Elizabeth. I know who I married. I know his flaws and weaknesses intimately. But I also believe in the possibility of redemption through accountability. The insight struck me with unexpected force. Vanessa hadn't married David despite knowing his true nature. She had married him because of it, seeing an opportunity to guide someone with significant talents toward a better expression of those gifts. That's either remarkably compassionate or incredibly ambitious, I observed. Possibly both. She laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her carefully composed features. Definitely both. I have no illusions about the challenge I've undertaken, but I believe people deserve the opportunity to become better versions of themselves, even people who have caused harm. Her words resonated with me in unexpected ways. Wasn't I engaged in a similar project with Drake and Associates, believing that a fundamentally flawed institution could be transformed into something better through determined intervention? I appreciate your candor, I told her sincerely. And while my personal history with David makes it difficult for me to share your optimism about his capacity for change, I respect your choice and your clarity about it. She nodded, apparently satisfied that her message had been understood. Thank you for listening, and thank you for judging me by my work rather than my personal connections. It means more than you might realize. After she left, I remained at my desk, contemplating the unpredictable ways that lives intersect and influence each other. 6 months ago, I could never have imagined that David's affair with Audrey would lead to a restructured law firm, or that his new wife would become one of my most effective executives, or that I would find a deeper sense of purpose through the very crisis that had seemed designed to destroy my self-worth. The human story is never linear, never as simple as villain and victim, never limited to the narrow roles we initially perceive. In calling me worthless, David had inadvertently catalyzed a process that revealed the true worth not just of me, but of dozens of talented people whose potential had been artificially constrained by systems he helped maintain. My phone buzzed, with a text from Marcus. Final Hernandez legal challenge dismissed with prejudice. Court awarded us costs. It's officially over. Another chapter closed. Stanley Hernandez, once the untouchable patriarch of Drake and Associates, had exhausted his legal options for challenging the restructuring. The firm was now indisputably under new management, its transformation no longer vulnerable to reversal through litigation. I forwarded the message to the executive team with a simple addition. Celebration dinner, Friday, 7 p.m., location to follow. As I finally prepared to leave for the day, Chicago's skyline was aglow with the colors of sunset, the lake beyond a deep, serene blue. I paused at the window, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 weeks, from being called worthless in my own living room to rebuilding one of the city's prestigious law firms in my own vision. The victory wasn't in proving David wrong. It was in discovering that my worth had never depended on his assessment in the first place. My phone buzzed again, this time with a personal email notification that made me smile. My mother had sent photos of my completed condo, the last decorative touches having been added that afternoon in preparation for my official move-in this weekend. The space looked warm, inviting, and unmistakably mine, filled with books, art, and comfortable furnishings that reflected my true aesthetic rather than anyone else's expectations. I took one last look around the office that had been David's less than 2 months ago. The space had been transformed along with the firm. The imposing mahogany desk replaced with a more collaborative arrangement. The intimidating visitor chairs swapped for comfortable seating that invited conversation rather than reinforcing hierarchy. The walls adorned with art by local female and minority artists rather than the predictable hunting prints and sailing scenes David had preferred. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed Audrey and Vanessa deep in conversation in a small conference room, their body language suggesting a difficult but productive dialogue. They noticed me passing and both nodded in acknowledgement. 3 women whose lives had been irrevocably intertwined by one man's actions, each now charting her own course while maintaining professional respect. In the parking garage, I found James waiting beside my car, his expression serious. "We need to talk about Kellerman Pharmaceuticals," he said without preamble. "There's been a development." I unlocked the car, gesturing for him to join me. "What kind of development?" "They're being investigated by the FDA for potential research data manipulation. The announcement goes public tomorrow morning. We need to decide our position as their counsel." This was precisely the kind of ethical dilemma that the old Drake and Associates would have navigated by prioritizing billable hours over integrity. The investigation would generate substantial legal fees, but representing a client who had potentially falsified safety data raised serious ethical concerns. "Schedule an emergency call with the executive committee for 8 p.m., I decided, and have Richard prepare a comprehensive analysis of our ethical obligations in this situation. James nodded approvingly. "I thought you'd say that. The old guard would have seen this solely as a revenue opportunity." "We're not the old guard," I reminded him, starting the car. "And our worth isn't measured in billable hours." As I drove toward my new home, I realized that the transformation of Drake and Associates was far from complete. The structural changes had been implemented, the toxic elements removed, the new direction established. But the real test would come in moments like this, when ethical principles collided with financial incentives. The coming weeks and months would reveal whether we had truly created something different, something better, something worthy of the talent and commitment of the people who had embraced our vision of what a law firm could be. My phone buzzed one last time as I pulled into my new condominium's parking garage. A text from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, suspecting its source. The message was brief. "Congratulations on the Hernandez dismissal. You've built something remarkable. D. David." After weeks of legal challenges and social media posturing, this private acknowledgement was unexpected. I didn't respond, simply deleted the message and slipped my phone into my bag. His opinion, positive or negative, no longer factored into my assessment of my own worth. As I took the elevator to my new home, I felt the weight of the past falling away, replaced by the expansive possibility of the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to demonstrate through action rather than words what kind of leader, what kind of person I truly was. The elevator doors opened to reveal my mother waiting in the hallway, beaming with excitement to show me the finished space. "Welcome home," she said simply, embracing me. Home. Not a showcase or a statement or a strategic asset, but simply home. A place where I could be fully myself, neither more nor less than the sum of my choices and capabilities. "It's perfect," I told her as we entered the condo together. And it was. Not because it met some external standard of value, but because it reflected my own authentic sense of worth, finally and fully reclaimed. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons, each day building upon the last to create something that barely resembled what had come before. Drake & Associates, now officially renamed Winterfall Legal Partners, had emerged from its cocoon of transformation, spreading new wings in Chicago's competitive legal landscape. The Kellerman Pharmaceuticals situation had proved to be our defining ethical moment. After careful consideration, we had withdrawn as their counsel, citing irreconcilable differences regarding disclosure obligations. The decision had cost us significant short-term revenue, but earned us something more valuable: a reputation for unwavering integrity that attracted clients who valued ethical representation above expedient solutions. "The Chamber's rankings are in," Marcus announced, entering my office without knocking, a privilege earned through months of shared battles and mutual respect. "We're ranked number 1 for employment law and diversity initiatives, and number 3 overall among Chicago firms." I accepted the report with quiet satisfaction. External validation was pleasant, but secondary to the internal metrics that truly measured our success: associate retention now at 94%, client satisfaction at 91%, and a robust pipeline of lateral talent eager to join our ranks. "And the financial projections?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marcus grinned. "Profitability is up 22% despite the Kellerman withdrawal. Turns out ethical billing practices result in more efficient work and greater client trust. Who could have predicted?" "Anyone who understood that integrity and profitability aren't mutually exclusive," I replied, returning his smile. "Where do we stand on the pro bono initiative?" "Exceeding targets by 15%. The community legal clinic opens next month, fully staffed and funded for the first 2 years." This achievement particularly pleased me. The clinic would provide essential legal services to underserved communities, addressing the systemic inequities that made justice more accessible to some than others. It also offered our associates meaningful opportunities to develop their skills while contributing to the greater good, professional development aligned with human values rather than solely billable targets. "Perfect timing for the anniversary celebration," I noted, referring to the gala we had planned to mark 6 months of successful transformation. "It gives us something substantive to highlight beyond financial metrics." The gala would serve multiple purposes: cementing our new identity in the legal community, recognizing the contributions of those who had made the transformation possible, and signaling to the broader business world that Winterfall Legal Partners represented a new model of professional services. "Speaking of the gala," Marcus said, his expression shifting slightly, "the RSVP list came in. David and Vanessa have accepted the invitation." I raised an eyebrow at this unexpected development. Though Vanessa continued to excel in her role at the firm, David had maintained his distance, focusing on rebuilding his career at a boutique litigation practice across town. Our divorce had been finalized months ago with minimal drama, each of us moving forward separately. "Interesting choice," I observed. "Did Vanessa explain why he decided to attend?" She said, and I quote, "David feels it's time to acknowledge publicly what he's come to recognize privately, whatever that means." I had my suspicions but kept them to myself. According to occasional updates from Vanessa, David had been engaged in a rigorous process of professional reinvention, eschewing the toxic behaviors that had defined his time at Drake, embracing a more collaborative approach with colleagues, even seeking therapy to address the insecurities that had driven his worst impulses. Whether these changes were genuine or merely pragmatic adaptations to his diminished circumstances remained to be seen. Either way, his presence at the gala would create a symbolic moment, the past and present converging to illuminate the distance traveled. "Make sure they're seated at Audrey's table," I decided after brief consideration. If this is truly about acknowledgement and reconciliation, then let's create space for it to happen fully. Marcus looked skeptical, but nodded. I'll update the seating chart, and I'll make sure security is discreetly informed, just in case acknowledgement turns into something less constructive. After he left, I turned to the window, gazing out at Chicago's skyline while reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. 6 months since David had called me worthless in our penthouse living room. 6 months of dismantling and rebuilding, of challenging entrenched systems and creating new possibilities. 6 months of becoming more fully myself with each passing day. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dinner still on for tonight? I have news." I smiled, typing a quick confirmation. Since my divorce, my mother had begun spending more time in Chicago. Rediscovering the city she had loved as a young woman before marriage had taken her to Minneapolis. Our weekly dinners had become a cherished ritual, a time to connect not as mother and daughter defined by familial obligations, but as two women sharing the adventure of creating lives aligned with their authentic values. The afternoon passed in a blur of client meetings, strategic planning sessions, and collaboration with Audrey on the Associate Development Program that had become the cornerstone of our talent retention strategy. Under her leadership, we had created a model that emphasized multidimensional growth rather than narrow specialization, enabling associates to develop both depth and breadth in their legal expertise. The Talent Management Committee has approved the flexible partnership track, she reported during our weekly check-in. Associates can now pursue partnership through the traditional billable hours route or through the alternative contributions pathway we designed. This innovation directly addressed a systemic issue in legal practice: the way traditional partnership criteria disadvantaged attorneys with caregiving responsibilities or commitments outside the firm. Our alternative pathway recognized contributions to knowledge development, client relationship building, and community engagement as equally valuable to raw billable hours. Excellent. How has it been received by the current partnership candidates? Audrey's smile told the story before her words did. 3 associates who were considering leaving have withdrawn their resignations. 2 who left under the previous management have asked to return. And applications for our fall associate class are up 47% from last year. And the old guard's response? I asked, referring to the remaining partners from the pre-transformation era. Mixed, but generally positive. They appreciate that we're expanding the definition of contribution rather than devaluing their own path. And frankly, those who can't adapt to a more inclusive model are gradually self-selecting out. I nodded, pleased but not surprised by this outcome. Human systems resist change until the benefits become visible, then adapt with remarkable flexibility once the new paradigm proves its value. As I prepared to leave for dinner with my mother, Lisa appeared with a last-minute message. James needed approval for a strategic investment opportunity related to our technological infrastructure. Tell him to proceed, I decided after reviewing the proposal. The initial outlay is substantial, but the long-term efficiency gains justify the investment. This, too, represented a significant departure from the previous management philosophy, which had prioritized immediate partner profits over long-term organizational health. We were building not just for today's success, but for sustainable excellence that would outlast any individual leader, including me. The restaurant my mother had chosen was a small Vietnamese place in Lincoln Park, family-owned and authentically delicious. She was already seated when I arrived, looking younger somehow than she had a year ago, her silver hair elegantly styled, her eyes bright with anticipation. "You're glowing," I observed, embracing her before taking my seat. "This news must be good," she laughed, a sound I heard more frequently now that David's subtle critique of her excessive enthusiasm no longer hung between us. "It is. At least, I think it is." She paused, suddenly uncharacteristically shy. "I'm moving back to Chicago permanently. I've accepted a position teaching art history at the community college." "Mom, that's wonderful!" Her passion for art history had been sidelined for decades during her marriage and subsequent career in educational administration. "When did this happen?" The opportunity came up suddenly. A former colleague reached out about a mid-year retirement. I interviewed last week while you were in New York for that conference. Her expression turned mischievous. I also found an apartment. In your building, actually. 2 floors down. You're kidding. But of course she wasn't. My mother had always made decisive moves once she determined her direction. It was a quality I had inherited from her, though I hadn't fully recognized it until recent events had forced me to reclaim my own decisiveness. Is that too close? I don't want to intrude on your independence. The question was genuine, free from the emotional manipulation that often characterizes parent-child relationships. It's perfect, I assured her. Close enough for impromptu dinners, far enough for separate lives. Our conversation flowed easily through dinner, touching on her teaching plans, the upcoming gala, and her burgeoning social life that now included a widowed history professor who shared her passion for art and architecture. I marveled at how our relationship had evolved from the somewhat distant formality of my marriage years into this rich, honest connection between equals. Enough about me, she said as we lingered over dessert. How are you really doing with all this success? Behind the professional accomplishments and strategic victories. It was the kind of question only someone who truly knew me would ask, looking past the external achievements to the internal experience. I considered it seriously, wanting to honor her insight with an equally thoughtful response. I'm integrated, I finally answered. For so long, I was compartmentalized. Eliza the wife, EC the financier, each with her own behaviors and boundaries. Now I'm simply Elizabeth, making choices based on consistent values across all aspects of my life. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. And is Elizabeth happy? Happy feels too simple, I replied. I'm fulfilled, challenged, purposeful, and, yes, often happy in moments rather than as a constant state. That's better than happiness, she observed. That's wholeness. Wholeness. The word resonated, capturing something essential about my journey from being shattered by David's casual cruelty to rebuilding myself on my own terms. Not simply repairing what had been broken, but creating something new and stronger from the fragments. The night of the gala arrived with the perfect combination of anticipation and confidence. The venue, the rooftop garden of Chicago's Contemporary Art Museum, glowed with subtle lighting that complemented rather than competed with the spectacular city views. 200 guests mingled among installations by local artists, the conversation humming with genuine engagement rather than the forced networking that characterized typical legal industry events. I circulated through the crowd, greeting clients, colleagues, and community partners with authentic attention, no longer playing the role of supportive wife or enigmatic financier, but simply being the leader I had become. Audrey approached, resplendent in a midnight blue gown that complemented her fair complexion. They've arrived, she murmured discreetly. Table 12, as arranged. I glanced in that direction, catching my first glimpse of David in nearly 6 months. He looked different, thinner, less polished, but somehow more present. Beside him, Vanessa was elegantly understated in pale gold, her hand resting lightly on his arm in what appeared to be a gesture of support rather than possession. Are you prepared for whatever he might say? Audrey asked, her concern evident. Completely, I assured her. Whatever happens tonight doesn't change what we've built or who we've become. The formal program began with a welcome from Marcus, followed by a short video highlighting the transformation of Drake & Associates into Winterfall legal partners. The before and after statistics were compelling, from 12% female partners to 48%, from 0 attorneys of color in leadership positions to 7, from client satisfaction rates in the low 70s to the low 90s. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the podium with calm confidence, surveying the gathered guests with genuine appreciation for their presence. 6 months ago, I began, we embarked on a journey to reimagine what a law firm could be. not just in terms of diversity or inclusion, though those are essential components, but in our fundamental understanding of what constitutes value in the legal profession. I went on to outline the philosophical shift that had guided our transformation, from a zero-sum conception where some must lose for others to win, to an expansive vision where excellence and equity reinforced rather than opposed each other. Tātai, results speak for themselves, I concluded. Increased profitability, enhanced client satisfaction, improved talent retention, and most importantly, a community of legal professionals who bring their full, authentic selves to work each day, no longer required to compartmentalize their humanity in service of an artificial professional ideal. The applause was warm and genuine, especially from the associates and staff who had experienced the transformation most directly. As I returned to my table, I deliberately passed by where David and Vanessa were seated, acknowledging them with a brief nod but not stopping, to engage. The message was clear. I recognized their presence but wasn't defined by our past connection. They were simply two guests among many at an event celebrating something much larger than any personal history. The evening progressed through dinner and informal conversation, the atmosphere relaxed yet purposeful. I was speaking with a federal judge about our pro bono initiative when I felt a presence at my shoulder. Turning, I found David standing there, his expression a complex mixture of discomfort and determination. "Elizabeth?" he began, using my full name rather than the diminutive Eliza he had always preferred during our marriage. "Might I have a moment?" I excused myself from the judge, leading David to a quieter corner of the rooftop where our conversation wouldn't be easily overheard. "Congratulations on all this," he said, gesturing to encompass the event and all it represented. "It's truly remarkable what you've accomplished." "Thank you," I replied simply, neither dismissing his praise nor appearing overly gratified by it. He seemed unsure how to continue, a stark contrast to the smooth, confident attorney who had once dominated every conversation. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, the words clearly difficult for him. "Not just for how our marriage ended, but for failing to see who you truly were throughout our relationship." I studied him carefully, trying to gauge the sincerity behind this unexpected acknowledgement. "Why now, David? What's changed?" He smiled, ruefully. "Everything? My career trajectory? My understanding of my own motivations? My relationship with Vanessa, which is different from anything I've experienced before." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Mostly, I've changed. Or maybe I'm finally becoming who I should have been all along." With Vanessa's guidance, I observed, not unkindly. "She's been," he hesitated, "relentlessly honest in ways I wasn't prepared for. It's uncomfortable, necessary. I'm not sure I deserve her." "That's probably accurate," I agreed, allowing a small smile to soften the assessment. "But perhaps that's not the point. Maybe relationships aren't about deserving, but about becoming." He looked startled by this perspective, then thoughtful. "I called you worthless," he said quietly. "It was the cruelest, most inaccurate thing I've ever said. I know words can't undo that harm, but I want you to know I recognize how deeply wrong I was about you, about what constitutes true value, about everything that matters." The apology was unexpected, particularly from someone whose pride had always prevented genuine acknowledgement of error. I took a moment to check my internal response, finding neither lingering pain nor vindictive satisfaction. Just a calm recognition that this closure was helpful, but not essential to my well-being. "Thank you for saying that," I replied with simple dignity. "I accept your apology, David." He nodded, visibly relieved but not presuming that this exchange entitled him to anything more than the basic respect I would offer any guest. "Your mother looks well," he observed, glancing toward where she was deep in animated conversation with the history professor who had become her regular companion. Happier than I remember. She is, I confirmed. We both are. A comfortable silence fell between us, the awkwardness of our initial encounter replaced by a muted recognition that we had once been important to each other, even if in ways that neither of us had fully understood at the time. I should return to Vanessa, he said, eventually. Thank you for including us tonight. It matters to both of us. As he walked away, I felt a sense of completion rather than closure, the final piece of a complex puzzle sliding into place, revealing a picture different from what I had initially imagined, but somehow more satisfying in its unexpected configuration. Later, as the event wound toward its conclusion, I found myself standing at the rooftop's edge, looking out over the city I had made my own. Chicago spread before me, a tapestry of lights against the darkness, each representing lives and stories as complex and multifaceted as my own. Audrey joined me, offering a glass of champagne. Successful evening, she observed, though I must admit I didn't expect David's apology. Neither did I confessed. Vanessa's influence, I suspect. Audrey smiled, a genuine expression free from the tension that had once characterized any mention of David or Vanessa. She's rather remarkable. I underestimated her. As did I acknowledged. As did David, though he seems to be learning better. We stood in companionable silence for a moment. Two women who had moved from being unwitting competitors in David's drama to colleagues united in creating something more meaningful than either of us could have built alone. What's next? Audrey asked eventually. For you? For the firm? For all of this? It was a question I had been considering myself, not from dissatisfaction with what we had accomplished, but from recognition that transformation is a continuous process rather than a finite achievement. Expansion, perhaps, I replied. Not just geographically or in terms of practice areas, but conceptually, taking what we've learned about integrating excellence and equity and applying it in new contexts. I thought of the community legal clinic we were launching, the educational partnerships we were developing with law schools to reshape legal education, the policy advocacy we had begun to address systemic barriers to justice. The possibilities are limitless when we stop defining value in narrow traditional terms, I continued. When we recognize that worth isn't determined by billable hours or corner offices, or even professional success, but by the impact we have on the lives around us. Audrey raised her glass in a quiet toast to redefining worth. I touched my glass to hers, feeling a profound sense of rightness, not the vindictive satisfaction of having proved David wrong, but the deeper fulfillment of having discovered my own truth through the very crisis that had seemed designed to destroy my self-perception, to becoming who we truly are, I amended softly. As the gala concluded and guests began to depart, I made my way through the crowd, exchanging final words with clients and colleagues, friends and former adversaries. Each conversation felt authentic, each connection genuine, no longer filtered through artificial personas or strategic calculations. My mother waited near the exit, ready to share a car back to our building. Successful evening, she observed, as we stepped into the elevator together. Very, I agreed. Though success feels like the wrong word somehow. Too external, too achievement-oriented, she smiled, understanding as always. Alignment, perhaps? When your outer life finally matches your inner truth. That was it exactly, alignment. Not perfect happiness or absolute triumph, but the profound satisfaction of living in accordance with my authentic values, making choices from integrity rather than expectation or fear. 6 months ago, David had called me worthless, unknowingly setting in motion a journey that would reveal my true worth, not just to him or to the professional world, but most importantly, to myself. As our car wound through Chicago's night-lit streets, I felt a deep gratitude for that painful catalyst and for the woman I had become through the process of reclaiming my value on my own terms, not worthless, not worthy by someone else's measure. Simply, completely, authentically myself, the only standard of worth that truly matters in the end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.